Welcome, everyone, to another episode. I'm Chris Watson, and if you ever wonder what makes people convert on your store, what makes them spend more money on your store, and how can you make sure that you're showing the right product at the right time for that particular visitor, I could not really think of anyone better than Carlos today to interview about these topics. So if you want to take your CRO skills to the next level and also understand how to analyze data after your tests, well, then you're definitely in for a treat. There's so much more value that we cover in this episode. So without further ado, excited to share this value with you. Let's dive right in. Right. So welcome, everyone. Super excited today. We've got Carlos Trujillo on the pod. He is a senior strategist at Speero with over a decade of experience working in the online marketing and mass media space. Carlos has led projects on web development and conversion optimization for more than 100 brands. And Carlos is also a CXL course instructor with an amazing course. I've been through it, I would say, too many times to count now, and it's super valuable. Every time you watch it, you learn new things. So anyone that hasn't, I would definitely recommend watching it. So all in all, it's very safe to say that we're in for an amazing episode. So Carlos, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Chris, for having me, and I'm so happy to be on the show. And yeah, excited to dive in some of these topics.
Nice, love it. Did I say your name the right way? Was my accent good?
Yeah, that was pretty good. That's better than what I'm used to.
Okay, nice. So we're off to a good start. I love that. Is it?
I'll go by Carlos T for many people as well. So
I think Carlos Trujillo is just it's perfect. It sounds good and it has a good ring to it. So let's go with that one. To start at the very beginning, of your journey. Like I said, you've got a very interesting one with tons of experience. Is it possible to learn a little bit more about your journey? I'm sure it's a super interesting one. You've got tons of experience. How did everything start for you?
Yeah, so it always started like in 2007. That's when I built my first website, like very randomly. Like I just looked for ways to put a website together because I wanted to create a blog and a community back then. And I did it for a couple of years, like not professionally. Then I took kind of a break, explore other industries and areas of interest of mine. Mm-hmm. Then in 2015, which is by the time of this recording, 9 years ago, I moved to France. By the way, I'm based in Colombia, in South America. But I moved to France for a year, and I didn't quite know it back then in terms of like the terminology, but I was looking for a remote job. Okay. I was looking for something I could do to make a living while living in a different country, and actually without an actual work permit. Yeah. Not that I wanted to work illegally, but just I was trying to create some kind of online business, basically. Nice. So that's when I restarted with this like web design thing. I started taking clients as a freelancer. It grew up to the point of like creating an actual company, an agency, and then build tons of websites, mostly for companies here in the Americas, also a few like in Europe. But eventually we started like niching down with this agency up to the point where we were specialized in building Shopify stores. We, in my former agency, or like the agency I founded, we were Shopify partners. We were basically using this as our main source of like technology, if you will. Although we also had a lot of experience with WooCommerce, which is another very well-known tech stack on the field. And then we started again specializing in this area, doing more and more of these. And in this journey, I wanted to obviously like skill up myself, like trying to provide better services for my clients, for them to get better business results as well. And that's when I found about CXL.com, which is an online institute that covers different topics on the online marketing spectrum, but is very well known for its conversion optimization mini degree. So that's exactly when the pandemic hit in 2020. They made a huge discount that I took advantage of. So I enrolled as a student. and I just got crazy with the content. That's the best way to put it. Like, it blew my mind in unexpected ways. I thought, and I think this is the case for many people, even potentially listening this, I thought I knew what CRO was, but after the first like couple of lessons and courses, I realized I didn't know a thing. Like, it was way more comprehensive than I initially thought. It was way more deeper than just the conception of just increasing conversion rates. And I got so deep with this content and this area of knowledge that after a year of taking basically every available course on the platform, I was invited by them to join their team on the agency side. Back then, it was still called CXL Agency, but we eventually rebranded to be Speero. And I've been with Speero ever since. Like, it was some kind of like a difficult decision for a moment in terms of like stopping the activities of my former agency that I founded. But I had such big admiration for these people that I really couldn't resist the opportunity. So at Speero, I've been having a similar journey in terms of like niching down industry wise. I we work with pretty much every kind of like industry in terms of like B2B SaaS, enterprise, and also e-com. But over the years, I've been specializing in e-com, particularly D2C e-commerce, which is what I know you guys also specialize in ConversionWise. And yeah, this has been my area of not only expertise, but something I'm kind of crazy about in terms of like learning more, like leveraging more like growth levers or pillars. And yeah, that's like a very short version of the journey that got me here to this point.
And it's a very interesting journey. First of all, thank you for sharing it. And yeah, I think, like you mentioned, from the beginning, you were already a little bit interested in that field, developing something, building something. And that's obviously also a part of CRO. You mentioned that at the beginning, you think you know what CRO is, but the more you learn about it, the more you realize you didn't really know anything because it's such a complex topic, so deep and so vast. So what do you think then for you is the thing that sort of inspires you or you find so interesting about it, right? Because sometimes people like CRO because you can, do a bit of research, but you said you went through every course on CXL, which is a lot of hours. So clearly you were super motivated. CXL, of course, or even Speero, now they wanted you on their team, so they were definitely amazed, by how dedicated you were. What is it about it that you just find so interesting that you can spend your entire days talking about it, working on it? What is it for you?
I think it's the idea of like, in a way, being able to quantify the impact of your interventions.
Okay.
Particularly in ecom. I mean, we all know there's a lot of information out there, a lot of things you could be doing, a lot of best practices and checklists you could be leveraging for growth. But it's really hard to assess and quantify if they are really making an impact or not. So this idea of combining kind of like the creative part of product development, introducing new features, new functionalities, new approaches, and into these products. And by product, I'm referring to the website or the Shopify store. And not only that, but being able to quantify the impact and see if it's actually making a positive impact on the business. It's something I got really fascinated because obviously, if you keep hearing all what's there to say in like X, or Twitter, or like LinkedIn, like there's so much you could be doing. Like I could invite anyone to do the exercise of going over like any of these sources I just mentioned today, and you could easily gather like, I don't know, 100 ideas of things you could improve or you could change on your store. But it's really hard to balance that out with a more objective approach in terms of like not only having the data, but also like being strategic about what you put your attention on. So that's definitely something that I found unique and interesting about the CRO industry, and being able to control like to run controlled experiments that really kind of like caught me pretty much from the get-go.
Nice. That is a very interesting response already. Like you said, you can quantify the impact you're having. And it's like, okay, I see a problem. I have an idea. Does it have an impact? And, you said that what sometimes, people, they maybe test one thing is, I'm just thinking a lot of times people, they want to test an idea. It's like, it's a winner, yes or no. And they just look maybe at conversion rate, and it's a bit of a simple approach. There are so many things that you can change. You said there are checklists. You got like you said, Twitter, LinkedIn. You're going to get tons of testing ideas. How do you then approach it? Where it's like, okay, this looks nice on paper, but how do you approach it when it's like, okay, this is actually a test that makes sense for this store, for this demographic, and you focus on that instead of you ignore all of the other noise. You focus on this specific problem. How do you approach this?
I love the question. So basically, I would start by saying, like, before you do any kind of like testing or A/B testing, like professionally, if you will, I think it's definitely good to get to a decent starting point. Okay. In terms of like knowing your experience is not full of bugs, of UX issues, like usability problems should be tackled before you start thinking and optimizing, in my opinion. Because one misconception about the whole CRO industry is that, or not misconception, but a lot of agencies and freelancers just maybe take a client, fix a lot of UX issues, and then they attribute those results to a CRO program, when in my opinion that shouldn't be the case. So I think before you start doing this more actively and more comprehensively, it's definitely a good idea to ensure you have a good starting point, a usable product, and something that people are not complaining about in terms of like very basic stuff. Now, from that point on, something I value about being able to be exposed to so many A/B tests, not only that I have run myself personally, but my peers as well, is that when you start testing actively, you realize most of the tests or the treatments or the changes you introduce don't really move the needle. Like that's like moving the needle. It's more of like the exception, not the rule. So it starts kind of like broadening your perspectives in terms of realizing that most of the things you believe are going to make an impact will kind of disappoint you, probably most of the times. Then you start approaching it differently, because when you have the opportunity to test this, you realize maybe a lot of like best practices that you saw here and there might not be a factor that are influencing a shift in user behavior for your company. And that's when like doing like proper user research comes into place. Like an impactful CRO program has user research as the foundation of those good ideas that should make an impact on the business. So that's the first thing I try to do when I onboard a new company, is try to find out what we can pull in terms of like insights from customers and from user research activities we can run, and then kind of like start connecting the dots to see how this can lead to treatments, interventions, or changes that would potentially move the needle. And now if you kind of pay attention to what I'm saying, I'm kind of like explicitly omitting or trying not to say test, but I kind of go by like treatments or ideas or interventions, because that's another misconception, like believing that there are just magical test ideas. Like at the end of the day, like the test itself, like the A/B test is not what's changing or what's making the business impact. Is the idea that you had, the treatment that you introduce, what has the potential to make more money, not the test itself. The test is just a mechanism to measure if there's, or to confirm if there's an effect. So I think something we should all kind of embrace is not looking at the experiment as the end, or just as a mean to an end. Like A lot of companies historically have grown in crazy ways without ever running an A/B test. Like, it's not like you must run A/B tests to grow. Like, actually, you can run thousands of really bad tests that won't move the needle and that won't make you grow. So it's more about balancing out and striking a balance between obviously thinking and impacting the user behavior, if you will, like finding out ways, and this might look differently for different kind of companies. How do you find these ways to really provide a better user experience, to really influence a change on their behavior? That's kind of the key part. Like, running tests, even though it's challenging in many ways, it's kind of the easier part. Like, the hardest part is to come up with those impactful treatments. Hope that helped answering your question. I know I rambled a bit,
No,
but
it was
it's
perfect.
kind of like the approach.
Definitely. And I hope that everyone took down notes, because I think that you just gave a very clear and in-depth framework of, how to approach it. Like you said, if you've got very basic little bugs or issues, you don't even need to test that. You just need to fix it, because it just needs to be fixed. It makes the brand look more professional. It's also, like you said, a lot of research. And I agree with you, that a lot of tests, we just said, it's CRO is you learn about it, you realize you don't know much about it. And I also find that the more you do CRO, or you optimize, or you experiment, the more you get surprised. Often tests that you think this is going to be a great test, it surprises you. And another test, you're like, this might not change too much. It just performs really well. So that's also just, I think, surprising. You mentioned it needs to be rooted in research, making sure you really understand the customer. You're really trying to solve a problem to change behavior. But to make sure you have good research, you need to make sure you have clean and trustworthy data, right? So I'm just thinking, from your experience, what are some mistakes that even, 8 or 9 figure brands, the ones that are more established, what are mistakes they're still making when it comes to the cleanness and the trustworthiness of their data?
Oh, don't get me started. There's definitely a lot to go over here. Like, interestingly enough, like, I don't think like business size is necessarily correlated with like better data.
Okay.
Like, I have
Interesting.
seen really weird examples of like big companies having like very untrustworthy, like, I don't know, Google Analytics setups. So I don't think there's a one size fits all approach here.
Okay.
Obviously, if we kind of like niche this down into D2C e-com, which is mostly happening on Shopify for the sake of this conversation, obviously that helps facilitating some things because we can make some kind of assumptions about the metrics that are relevant to track, kind of like the tech stack being similar across brands. Like,
Yeah.
most of the companies we both work with might be using GA4 or Mixpanel or Amplitude or something of that nature. Some might be using like testing tools that pull data directly from Shopify, and so on and so forth. So this is definitely easier to approach compared to like any other industry that can be really, really, really different in terms of like one business compared to the other.
Mm-hmm.
But still, I see a lot of brands not really auditing their tech stack, the cleanliness of the data they are collecting, how much it's really matching between platforms. Like, for example, I don't know, like they haven't paid attention about how much the data you see on your testing tool correlates with the data you see on Shopify or and on GA4. So it's definitely important to take into consideration. And there's something else I wanted to mention. It's kind of like a tip that I mentioned in the CXL course. I learned the hard way that obviously this is more of a thing in some countries than in others, but most of the testing tools will track conversions or transactions and revenue on the thank you page, of the site. But the thing is, there are many scenarios and instances where people might not return to the thank you page. For example, if they use like a third-party payment provider like PayPal. So, for example, I had a client whose customers used like PayPal in a like more than the average, I would say. So they had like 40% of their customers checking out with PayPal. And at some point, we realized a big chunk of this subsegment of customers weren't being tracked in the testing tool because that visit to the thank you page never happened. And we learned these when we run some experiments that were directly related to the payment methods, specifically kind of like highlighting the available payment methods and showing that PayPal was an option, like on a product page. Then that was what triggered the conversation and the research to conclude that this was a problem. But this is something that's usually overlooked, for example. So in that case, the solution was to trigger the conversion goals server side. So we were using Convert with that client, and now the data is pushed server side when an order is placed, not client side on the thank you page. Just as an example, I'm pretty sure so many people have had similar examples, but it's definitely something you need to pay attention for, because plugging some kind of testing tool is easy, and getting trustworthy results is the hard part.
It is. It's very hard. It's very interesting, actually, what you said, where there's no correlation, between the size of the brand and the trustworthiness of the data. I don't know why I was under the idea that bigger brands always, they have their data fixed, they have it clean. But it's actually just interesting that you've seen so many more examples than I have with, big brands and how clean their data is. That's a very interesting one as well. You just mentioned, with PayPal, or just if the payment is actually counted in the testing tool. So I guess it's also per brand and per context, where is the data clean, and just going sort of over it. But let's say you've got clean data, or at least your data is as clean as you try it to be. You mentioned, in the CXL course, which I think is super interesting, is the 4 optimization pillars, right? So before going more in depth with each of these pillars, can you, for anyone that hasn't seen the course yet, just go over the pillars and why you think these 4 pillars are so important?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically the thesis behind this course, because obviously CXL has a bunch of really good courses on CRO, UX design, and growth in general, is that I learned the hard way that there are many things that, especially in e-com, we face in the day-to-day that are not really covered anywhere, at least not comprehensively, or at least not in an easy to find way.
Okay.
And one is the fact that when people are hired to do CRO, either in-house or through an agency or as freelancers, there's some kind of like misconception, if you will. I was going to say disconnection, but it's more of like a misconception that the only thing that matters is conversion rate, But actually, at the end of the day, when you start learning more and when you get like more involved in the business, conversion rate is really some kind of a vanity metric. It's so easy to manipulate. It doesn't really tell you a good story in terms of the business. You can just like start a 90% off discount tomorrow, and I can assure you that the conversion rates will skyrocket, but that won't mean anything good for your business, So something I learned over the years by doing this every single day with companies that are investing in it is that the most mature companies don't focus solely on conversion rate. They obviously pay attention to that. By conversion rate, especially in e-com, we obviously refer to transactions or orders. But there are some other ways that we can influence business growth with this same set of frameworks and processes, So you can have this exact same conversion rate and you can still influence business growth if you basically touch any of these other pillars. So these pillars are obviously number one is conversion, because I by any means not referring that this is not relevant enough. It's relevant because that's the enabler. It enables any other of the pillars to be relevant. But the second one is spend, or like how do you make people to spend more on your store? In our terminology, that would be how do we increase average order value? So again, you can stick or have the same conversion rate, but if you get people to spend more in average, you'll still make such a positive influence on the business. There are many cases that you and I have both seen where even you can decrease conversion rates slightly, but still make more money and revenue per visitor if you get to increase AOV. So that's the second pillar. The third pillar is the frequency. We obviously all know that the more often your clients come, your customers come, the better for the business. We all have heard that it's cheaper to maintain or to retain an existing client than to acquire a new one. But this is something I don't think many companies are paying attention to when it comes to experimenting and introducing changes. So by influencing frequency, we get to either both provide such a good customer experience that we increase the livelihood of customers returning more and more, like again and again. Or also, if you are a brand that sells subscriptions or that allow people to subscribe for auto replenishment of products, how you can influence more of these signups to happen. This is something I've been playing with a lot within the last couple of years. Like a lot of the companies I work with are aligned with pushing more like energy and effort into increasing subscriptions because they know it's better for them and their unit economics. So that's the third pillar. Like again, you could keep the same conversion rate, the same AOV, but if you get more people to subscribe, or you ensure or you increase the likelihood of them coming more often, you're still growing a business. And the fourth one, and per heads up, this is the more advanced one, especially in terms of measurement, is merchandising. Same story. You can get the same conversion rate, the same AOV, the same purchase frequency. But if you push products that are more profitable for your business than others, you will still influence business growth and have a positive effect on the bottom line. So here we're talking about catalog optimization. When I say it's more advanced or complicated to measure, is because obviously, for example, most of the testing tools don't really have this into consideration, like at least the normal ones. By normal, I mean the ones that are available for deep multiple tech stacks. They won't show you these, like they will show you conversions, potentially revenue. You could custom track sign-ups for a subscription, for example, but otherwise it's very limited what you can observe. But with some other, when connecting multiple sources of data, or I will give a shout out to Intelligence here because they're like a testing tool that's exclusive to Shopify, and they are trying to make this easier. You'll be able to see which products are more profitable to you and kind of like not only run tests, focus on influencing this pillar, but actually measure the impact. So these are the four pillars that I encourage companies and CRO professionals to focus on to influence business growth beyond just conversion rates. That would be the easier way to put it.
Again, a very complete and in-depth answer. So again, thank you for sharing that. And it gives everyone listening a different perspective, I think, because like you said, often people, they focus on conversion rate. What's our conversion rate for today? Oh, it's down, but maybe traffic is coming from a different source. I mean, we could be talking about hours, for why the conversion rate maybe is up, maybe it's down. There are so many external factors, but I love how you're looking at different elements that are still going to, build the business or grow the business. So if we go at the first point, so when I'm guessing when you start with a brand, you got someone that just landed on a homepage, a collection page, product page, whatever the case may be. And your goal is to try and get the first one, like you said, the most important is obviously to get people to buy. Because if they buy, they can spend more, they can buy more often, but you're trying to get that first step. How do you optimize for, before thinking about all the other ones, how do you just optimize for the first step, which is the convert?
Yeah, so in my experience, and this is something we commonly or often fall for when doing CRO, we sometimes just try to bring really disruptive design patterns and new UX components and things that look amazing. But in my experience over the years, the most impactful treatments or changes we can introduce are normally on the messaging side of things.
Okay.
Meaning, like, when you let the user know something they might not be quite aware of, when you can address some kind of like hesitation or concern about like whatever product we are selling. So in my experience, sometimes some of the most impactful, let's say, unblockers to get more people to convert are just simply, in some cases, just simply pieces of text, pieces of copy you can put here and there. I shared an example recently that got a lot of traction. Well, this is in a way related to the third pillar, which is frequency, but for the sake of this conversation, it will also help with the first one. A lot of brands offer like subscriptions, but they simply have some kind of like very, very overly simplified toggle of like one-time purchase, subscribe and save 10%.
Yeah.
But the truth is that that's not enough, like just saving 10%, it's probably not enough value for such a commitment.
Yeah.
So something I have tried over the years, and it keeps working. I know it won't work for certain brand at some point, but in my experience have kept working, is just added some bullet points to the subscription offering. Like, hey, you can switch your flavor or scent every month. You can cancel whenever you want, You can pause at any point. So sometimes just these three very simple lines of text make such an impact. But of course, it will be very random and even unlikely to come up with what would be relevant without some kind of user research in some shape or form, because that's what let you connect the dots between like the opportunity and the treatment, So obviously there's a lot of research activities you could run. When I'm asked to prioritize one, my go-to one in ecom are post-purchase polls.
Okay.
Asking people what almost held you back from converting today, from placing an order today, right on the thank you page, right after they made and placed an order. It's so insightful because through their voices, through their own words, you get to see those holes and gaps in the user experience that you can start tackling. So that's kind of like more of like a recipe, my go-to approach in terms of like tackling those opportunities to get more people to become customers, which, to your point before, it's a must. Like, there's no other pillars if we don't get people to convert in the first place. So that would be kind of like my top level approach.
Okay. I find every answer you give is just super interesting, and it's always very complete. So I love it. It's very interesting.
I talk a lot.
No, not enough, I would say. I mean, I'm thinking now we should have taken more time, because everything you're saying, I've got more questions, and I could just keep asking questions for hours. But it's very interesting that you said that most of the time, or from your experience, that messaging is actually a very, very big part to unblock, people to potentially buy. You also answered a question I was going to ask, which was, what kind of research methods are your go-tos? You said post-purchase survey. But then I'm thinking, though, when you've got so much data, we all have biases where we think we have an idea as to what a problem could be, and we're going to try and convince ourselves that the data is confirming my idea. Let me test this. How, again, with your experience, do you give context to the data, and you're like, okay, this is an actual problem from all the different traffic sources or data sources, or research methods. Okay, let's tackle this problem. What's your approach with this?
Yeah, I'm going to say something that might not be that actionable for everyone listening to us, but something we try to do at Speero is to get different people to do this. So I would get an analyst to go over this data and bring and get to the conclusions on their own, so that the data analysis is not biased by myself.
Okay.
But in a lot of ways, like the kind of like the pro and the cons, the pros and the cons of e-commerce optimization is that we know a lot. We have a lot of information. Like any given, like not only CRO professional but agency would have like 15 test ideas out of the box for a new client, for a new company that you come across at some point. So I think it is not easy, but we should try to like balance a strike of not being so prescriptive in terms of like the solutions, but trying to find like a good balance in terms of like backing experiments through really detected opportunities. Although I would say it's always good to keep a good balance between both, because let's say you start with a client on day one, or you start just a new role as an in-house practitioner. It's going to take some time before you get exposed to these research activities and these data in order to back up your ideas with like more proper data. So it's always good to balance out these with like some kind of like heavy, like some kind of like a heavy start in terms of velocity. You know, like it's good to have some kind of portfolio of ideas you would like to start testing from day one. That's not going to harm whatsoever. The problem is that so many companies just keep doing that for years, just keep testing random stuff here and there that won't really move the needle, or just will do very randomly. So it's I think it's some kind of an art to balance that out, so that brute force, that was the word I was looking for before, you balance out brute force with more like research backed ideas, because I think growth through CRO is a factor of both like velocity and like, let's say, how strategic the ideas or the changes you introduce are. So yeah, I don't think it's either or. I think both things can be achieved. And at the end of the day, there's no better exercise to increase an experimentation practice than testing. Like the more tests you run, the better in terms of like increasing the practice and making the team more professional on the topic.
Again, very, very interesting, I find, to focus on velocity. Again, interesting that you're saying, that with experience, like you said, whether it's a CRO specialist, whether it's an agency, from experience tests that worked well. You maybe tailor it to the specific demographic or the type of product or the industry that maybe a new client has. So I like the sound of testing a lot, learn, from those tests, get an initial sort of feel how people maybe respond to it. And then while doing so, just add more data behind it. And the more you test, like we said, sometimes you can be surprised with a test where you just followed some intuition and it actually performed very well. And by accident, you uncover a really good test. You hear stories about the intern or the human resources person gave or a suggestion. They said we should try this, and that's what scaled the business dramatically. So I like, again, the idea you had where you just do it in groups. You ask people different perspectives and all that. So that's for the conversion side. When it comes out to,
if you let me just wrap that part up,
please do.
I think it's always beneficial to get the company familiar with the whole process. So those first, I don't know, 10 tests you're gonna run might not move the needle like drastically, but they will show the team like the process, how it works. Like it will allow you to report, to put together some artifacts and some kind of rituals you can leverage. So I think, especially when starting out doing CRO for a given company, it's important to pay attention to the process as a whole, so that it's not only about the business outcome, which is what we definitely are after at the end, but how do we get people familiar to all we're doing, so that we're not just sitting there in some kind of silo that nobody is paying attention to.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. And also, like you said, it sort of builds the client understands, okay, we're testing, it builds the culture, and it also maybe sets the foundation for everyone to be more open-minded for it in the long term. So I'm glad you sort of added that as well to it. Um, so now let's talk about spend a bit. You know, you manage to get people to buy, you want them to spend more. So even if conversion rate goes down a bit, like you said, we've seen it where conversion rate maybe goes down, but since the AOV goes up, at the end they're making more revenue, or even the bottom line is better. So what is your approach then when it comes to increasing spend, which is the second pillar?
Yeah. So what's interesting about this is that even though for both of us and many of the listeners, it might sound obvious that this is a relevant thing, there's a lot of companies testing out there without measuring revenue, for example, or having a real mess with measuring revenue across different currencies and countries, for example, which is a big challenge on the Shopify ecosystem, for example. So I think even though it might sound too obvious, maybe for you and other people, like the first step is to track revenue and track it properly.
Okay.
Similarly to what I mentioned before, like making sure you have a data that's as clean as possible, that correlates with what you're seeing on your backend or your Shopify dashboard of, whatever is relevant to you. That would be step one. And then there are some other kind of similar activities we can run for these, where we focus more on that optimizing the experience for those who converted already. I recently said post-purchase polls, and when you rephrase it, you say post-purchase surveys, and they might seem like the same thing, but there are actually instances where they might be different things. Mm-hmm. So I want to kind of like deep dive on that a bit, because, for example, to us, a poll is just like one open-ended question at a thank you page, for example. But maybe, and this is all rubrics and semantics, it doesn't really matter. Like what really matters is the concept behind. But we also can run surveys, in terms of like maybe reaching out to customers via email and asking 10 more like deep level questions. For some brands, 10 questions might be too much. Mm-hmm. 3 or 4 might be enough. But it's more about learning more about those existing customers. If you have the chance, talk with the customer service team that is receiving calls from the customers, asking about how they use a given product, how they consume it. It's more about learning the habits of customers. So you're more strategic about like pushing cross-sells, upsells, and so on. Some other thing that I have seen over and over again and is that some brands just try to optimize for spend by introducing a countless and completely annoying number of upsells and pop-ups and stuff to the experience. And that's definitely not the answer in many of the cases, or at least you should make sure you test the impact of that, because it's not always straightforward that if you add more pop-ups with more cross-sells, it will increase AOV. There's a big chance you will just annoy people and they will leave because of that. So it's more about like being strategic about your cross-selling, being definitely a key component here, your cross-selling strategies, and kind of like trying to test everything here. And something that's pretty common as well is that when you think about increasing AOV, you think about measuring AOV. But actually measuring and reporting on AOV is not necessarily a good idea from an experimentation standpoint, because for you to be able to compare AOV in a proper way, like in a statistically valid way, your number of converters should be exactly the same for control and variant, which is practically impossible. It's very unlikely you will have the exact amount of converters for both control and variant. So this definitely makes for a bigger conversation, but where I'm going to is that it's a better idea to measure and to report on revenue per visitor or revenue per session as a criterion here, because that will account for both conversions plus AOV. That's like the sub product of those key metrics, and it will give you a better picture, especially when it comes to making sure one doesn't affect the other, negatively at least.
Yeah. Okay, that's a very interesting and deeper insight, as you said. So just to make sure everyone sort of understands correctly, and to make sure I also understand correctly, is when trying to see or when trying to do an AOV test, or just make sure a spend increases, instead of looking at AOV to make sure that it just makes sense, it's better to look at maybe revenue per visitor, and then see if obviously conversions also didn't take too much of a dip. But that is a metric you would look at to see if your AOV test had a positive impact or not.
Yeah, basically because your denominator will remain being users, which is your sample of users. This can get quite geeky and might not be that relevant for everyone listening, but it's important to know. So I'm not saying let's not look at your AOV.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can look at it, you can use it to inform your reporting, but it's from a technical standpoint not a valid mechanism to compare with. It's because it's kind of like not comparing apples to apples, given that the number, like your sample, might be unbalanced in terms of like not being exactly the same from control and variant. So you are randomizing visitors at a user level or at a session level, like depending on the tool. You should report at a user level. That's when reporting on, in this case, revenue per visitor. I'm using revenue per visitor and revenue per session indistinctly because it varies depending on the tool, but that's why it's important. In addition to the fact that, again, it comprises both conversions and AOV. So it's like, it just gives you such a cleaner and better story about what's going on, basically.
Okay, that's a very interesting insight. So it makes me think two questions then for the next one, which is, if we talk about frequency now, the third pillar, how do you go about increasing frequency, and then also how do you go about tracking frequency to just make sure, okay, we're tracking this the right way to avoid making mistakes like you just mentioned that people can make with spend. So yeah, how do you increase frequency, and also how do you track it?
So the tracking part is definitely challenging. In most cases, that will involve introducing some kind of data warehouse solution, like using BigQuery and pulling different data sources into there. Is definitely not easy. When it comes to having like a full picture about like lifetime value or payback periods or something of that nature. Now, there are simpler things that could be done. Like, for example, you can, in a way more easy and realistic way, track subscription signups, for example. So you can create a custom goal that shows you how many of the total converters sign up for a subscription, and that can be leveraged as a success criterion when running tests. So that's definitely a very easy way to start. As I mentioned before, some tools are aiming to make this whole thing easier. I'm not affiliated with them in any ways. We're at Speero tool agnostic, but I really admire, and I'm definitely paying a lot of attention to what Intelligence is doing, as well as other tools in the Shopify ecosystem like Shoplift or AV Convert, because they are basically like decreasing the likelihood of messing up things by pulling data from a different source. They let you run tests, but pull the data directly from Shopify. So that'll make so many things way easier because there's no room for discrepancies, at least conceptually. So that's definitely enabling or facilitating this process. This process is a lot because, for example, Intelligence is aiming to show you profit per visitor, which is going a step beyond what I just mentioned before. Also, they let you track like the subscription behavior and for a given test, or the behavior of subscribers for a given test. So I'll definitely pay attention to that because that will make it easier to measure the effectiveness of the initiatives here. This goes both to pillar 3, which is frequency, and pillar 4, which is merchandising, because it's a very similar story in terms of the background I just provided.
Definitely.
Now back to your question in terms of like business impact and changes and how to influence that. I think something a lot of brands overlook is the fact that your first experience as a buyer like influence the likelihood of you coming back as a customer like in a significant way. And I always bring the analogy of the physical world, like the way you felt when you shop at a given store, like how you felt treated, how a representative helped you, how your experience while checking out, while unboxing the product, while interacting with customer support will definitely influence the likelihood of you becoming a repeating customer. So that's the first kind of like heuristic I will follow, like making sure you provide a great experience from the get-go. Like don't wait until visitors become customers to start retaining them. Like you should start your retention initiatives from the first visit. So that's something I suggest kind of like thinking about. Obviously, that's kind of harder to measure.
Yeah.
But also, as I mentioned before, like it's incredible how many subscription offerings are just overly simplified. Like telling me that I'm gonna save 10% won't be enough in many of the cases. So like show me the real benefit of this. If you need to tell a story, maybe create a separate landing page to explain your subscription offering. You know, like probably gotta get more creative on this front, but it's more about like putting on in your customer's shoes, wearing your customer's shoes and asking yourself like, is this compelling enough for me to subscribe? And if the answer is no for too many days, like you should probably do something about it.
It's very interesting. And actually, as you're saying that, I remember what you also just mentioned with messaging, or there's maybe just one thing that people want to know about or a doubt they have, which again, it's giving me good ideas because again, what you mentioned with subscription, just 10% or just a discount, everyone is expecting already a discount nowadays. So just telling them that won't really change much. And I notice sometimes for myself is when I'm in a store buying something, whether that's maybe clothes, whether that's something you're going to eat, there's always this one thing you're trying to look for, this little feature, this little detail. And sometimes it's really hidden. And you're just thinking like they didn't do a lot of research, or they think, oh, it's not important. But being, the sort of ideal customer profile, it's super important to you. And it just makes me think, okay, if I have this in a physical store, people must be having this also on an actual store, So just saying that everything you're saying, it makes me think as well a little bit. And you touched on.
I love the analogy, and if you let me add something to that, another common mistake I see with brands is that they believe everyone should be a subscriber, but that's not necessarily the answer. Like, don't turn good one-time buyers into bad subscribers, because another common problem is like, especially when these subscriptions are easy to cancel, is that so many people will just sign up for month one, take the discount, and then cancel the subscription, which you don't want. So hence the importance of measuring this effectively, because it's important to compare the impact that some of your changes have on the long-term payback periods or lifetime value. Like maybe for your brand in particular, it's better to keep more people buying once and trying to get them come back on their own will to buy again, instead of like getting them sign up for a subscription. So this is more about like thinking broadly in terms of like not seeing everything just black and white, but getting into more of the details and realizing what's really valuable for your business.
That's again, very interesting perspective of, okay, maybe you got more subscribers, but is that really a good thing? And also, what is it doing to your brand image? And I love how you mentioned it at the beginning, but through these questions, it's becoming even more obvious, is one metric is going to be impacted by another one. And you just need to be able to understand the big picture. You get the conversion, but do you also get the long-term customer satisfaction, the brand image, the spend, the loyalty, all those kind of things. So it's just very interesting to talking with you just makes you think, okay, you look at it maybe from a different perspective, So I find that super interesting. And if we go onto the last pillar, you touched on it already a little bit, but on the last pillar, which I believe is merchandising, how would you again approach it? What's your sort of strategy? And I'm getting the feeling that every pillar you've got some great tips with mistakes to avoid. So if you've got any for the fourth one, I'm all open for it.
Yeah. So again, this can get quite challenging in terms of measurement because it's not that straightforward. Like you definitely like if you want to tackle it like properly, you need to involve your finance team in a shape or form to know what's really profitable. You need to account for products that might be selling well, but maybe might be having too many returns or too many units return. So this definitely requires like seeing the full picture, paying a lot of attention to the unit economics. And then after you get this data, obviously trying to influence like, so if you get to know that product B is it's just more convenient product for your business to offer, then you can start playing with it. And maybe on your catalog page, you make it the first product on the list of products,
Yeah.
But what's key about this is that, again, if you're measuring just conversions and revenue, your analysis must be more complete than that. Okay. So that you take the whole picture into consideration of like what happened next, for example, like analyzing some cohorts, seeing how many returns a given product had, what's the margin profit or the contribution margin of a given product, and so on and so forth. So this is not as hard in terms of like the executions, because the executions might, in so many cases, just mean maybe changing the order of things, maybe pushing some key products where you have like a lot of inventory for as a cross sell. Like there are certain things that can be done on this front that could be pretty straightforward from an executional standpoint. It's more about like the bigger challenge is about knowing what to optimize for here. But yeah, I've seen some brands doing some cool stuff about like, taking a product that nobody was paying attention to in the company in terms of like inventory, and then swapping some kind of a existing cross sell that had been available for a while, swap it for this new product that nobody cared for, seeing that the revenue and the conversions were not affected, and obviously making such a positive impact for the business, because you're not hurting any metric, but you're moving this slow inventory you gotta get rid of, as an example.
Very nice example, though. Yeah, again, I think also for seasonal brands, maybe also clothing, where you've got your winter sales or your winter edition. If you're going closer to summer, you want to make sure all of the winter sort of leaves, so you sort of upsell that. So that's again a very, very interesting idea. And I think
apparel stores are really good at this. They normally have merchandising people that just dedicated, I mean, not to test over these, but to kind of like provide the insights that you can leverage. So if somebody in your organization is doing some kind of merchandising projects, definitely talk to them, because they will give you good ideas of running tests on this front.
Definitely. And I think this has been very complete. Like we talked about the most important part, which is getting conversions. Then it's like, how can you make sure you have the conversions, but how can you make sure people spend more without negatively impacting conversions, increasing spend, and also making sure that the right products are in the right area at the right time. I could keep asking questions for hours. I know we are limited with our time. I have some rapid fire questions I love to ask. Before we go into those, I just have one last question, which is less on the optimization side, but given the fact that you've worked with so many brands, you've spoken, with so many different stakeholders, do you have maybe any tips or any advice to keep a good client relationship? Obviously, I'm guessing good results, good proactive communication. That's obvious. Like you need to have that. But with your experience, what are other ways to just keep the client satisfied, happy, and just happy to work with you?
I think I'm very opinionated here. I think one key point is to embrace the fact that people don't care about CRO or experimentation. Okay.
Okay.
It's just a mean to an end. Like whoever is paying your salary cares about business growth, most likely, like unless you're in a very mature company doing some kind of like uh, really comprehensive UX initiatives and trying to measure the effectiveness of every change and learning to test. But that's rarely the case. In most cases, just make the assumption that people don't care about your experiments as experiment itself. It's more about how you can help them achieve their goals quicker and more effectively. So I think that's an important like factor to take into account, to realize that maybe you don't need to make every test like a 10-page report that nobody's going to read. Maybe you don't need to share these in some kind of all hands where people are just turning the camera off and doing something else. You need to get creative about how do you expose people to these learnings, to the part that's relevant to them, without overwhelming them with all our geeky stuff.
That's super interesting. And again, it resonates a lot because, like you said, as a business owner, you probably just care about growth. You don't care that this variation triggered this, and they probably like, okay, did we make more money? Yes or no, and that's it. So maybe communicating in a way where you're showing them like we're on the same side. We want business growth instead of going heavy into the details. So okay, that's very, very interesting. And like I said, I could keep asking questions because every answer you give is so complete. It gives me ideas, it gives me other questions, and it just I learned tons through this episode. So I really want to thank you for that very much. I know for a fact everyone listening also learned a lot. And before just finishing this episode, I'd love to have some quick fire questions. Are you ready for them?
Shoot it. Yeah.
Perfect. So,
hopefully.
Yeah, easy, no problem. I'm sure we're good here. So, what's your bucket list holiday destination?
Probably Japan or Australia, where I haven't been.
Australia. So you're not scared of the massive spiders, the snakes, everything that can kill you?
Not at all.
Okay, impressive.
I've been lucky enough to be in many places, but haven't been to this area of the world yet. Okay. So yeah, definitely on my bucket list.
Nice, beautiful places. What's your favorite podcast or blog or maybe book even to just follow, to listen or to read when it comes to the topic of CRO optimization and all of that?
I'm really a hardcore fan of Jason Fried and the team at 37 Signals, even though they are not really much into A/B testing or any of the things we care about. Like I love their approaches to things, their contrarian opinions on stuff. So basically, the book Rework, as well as their different blogs and publications, it's something I recommend people to take a look at.
Nice. Okay. Nice recommendation. I'm not sure if this next question is a rapid fire question, but I'm just very curious to have your opinion on it, which is with, the rise of AI, machine learning, those kind of things, people are scared that as optimizers, we're going to lose our job. We're going to feel like copywriters, who they feel like ChatGPT is just taking their job. How do you see, or where do you see the future of optimization in the future?
When we started this conversation, I mentioned before you think about doing CRO and optimization, you should get a really good baseline of making sure things work, things have some usability elements and principles into consideration, and so on and so forth. I think all these new AI tools and solutions will allow all of us to be very good at that, like making sure that we have a bug-free experience and that all the fundamentals are covered. But when it comes to innovation and differentiation, for obvious reasons, like AI and these kind of like solutions will just make everything look very much alike each other. It's going to be, in my opinion, my prediction is it's going to be a great way to get to a good starting point. But when it comes to innovation, to break the mold, to draw outside the lines, that's like, that won't be so easily replaced. Because if it was, everything would look the same at some point. So I think there's still going to be room for doing disruptive stuff that will be kind of like unmatched by these type of solutions. That's my perspective on these kind of things.
Okay. You've got a very interesting perspective with a lot of things I find where it's not, you expect, a certain answer maybe, but it's actually very different and it's a unique perspective. So it's very interesting to ask you questions. Okay, two more. What's your favorite hobby outside of work?
Music, making music. I've been doing that for 2 decades now. At some point, it was like my main profession, but I eventually realized it wasn't in terms of like how much time I'm dedicating to it.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm really have good gear and stuff to make music, as well as traveling. I love traveling. That's one of the things I love the most about being on the Speero team, that we are spread across like 20 countries. So we get to visit colleagues and we get to meet on different places of the world. So that's really fun.
Okay, nice. And it's nice. It's very different, those things as well. So it's nice to take your mind off of work sometimes and just to focus on your hobbies. So that's nice. And last one, what's the last movie or show that you've recently binge watched?
It's gonna be sound funny and surprising, but it was Sex and the City with my
Okay.
wife. We
Okay.
binged the whole show, at least like the original one,
Okay.
in like a month and a half. So yeah, it was funny.
They've got a lot of seasons, don't they?
They did then a couple of movies and then like a more recent version of
Okay.
the show that we should watch next, I guess.
Okay. But that's
It's been around for like 25 years or so.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, but that makes sense. That's like a classic, like Friends. You have to have seen it, so a classic
And
one.
it's like very relaxing, to end the day. And it's not like you need to stress yourself a lot, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's just like you said, you take your mind off it, you just watch it, you relax. It's a nice story, so nice. So, Carlos, this has been an amazing episode. I'm sorry we went a little bit over the time that was intended to be there, but like I said, every answer was so valuable, so interesting. I'm excited to just watch this episode again, to just take down notes and to learn. So, thank you so much for being here, and also for everyone that wants to follow you, reach out, ask questions, or just follow your journey, what's the best place for them to go to?
Okay, well, thank you, Chris, for the invitation. It was really nice for me to be on this podcast, considering how much I admire what you guys do at ConversionWise and some of the former guests that have been on the show. So yeah, thanks for that. In terms of like reaching out to me, the place where I'm the most active is definitely LinkedIn. It's where I would recommend people like connecting, and will definitely shamelessly promote my CXL course on CRO for e-commerce growth, which I hope we can link
We will.
to from here.
Yeah, I will definitely put this in the description because people need to watch it. Like I said, I've watched it many times and it's super interesting. So again, Carlos, thank you so much for your time. Love this.
Thanks, Chris.